Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here tonight to talk a little bit about Titanfall 1. That's right. I've been spending the last few days, probably 3 or 4 days here and there, getting in some matches of the good old Titanfall 1, playing some attrition, whenever was available on PC. That is the gameplay you guys are seeing today. Just really revisiting the game for a significantly extended period of time. You know, I've played matches here and there over the past several months since Titanfall 2's release, but I haven't really just hardcore dove back into the game and really manufactured some thoughts, you know, some opinions, and I guess a bit of discussion as to how the game feels now that I've played Titanfall 2. Now, this is really dangerous territory to step into, in my opinion. Whenever you look back at, like, the first game or the second game in a series of multiple games, it's easy to get really just caught up in thinking that everything they did in the first game was way better, and all of the decisions they made this time around were horrible. Why would they change that? Why would they change this? It sometimes is harder to see the things that were changed or weren't changed and the effects that they have than to just look at the things that you missed and to say that the game would have been better had they done this, or it would have been better had they done that. You can say that, but it's really difficult to really know. And again, it's so much harder to see the changes and to actually know whether or not they've made a positive impact. It's a difficult thing to do. Nostalgia is going to get in the way. Your memories are going to get in the way. You know, you're going to think that that was the greatest idea ever. So I think it's really hard to have these sorts of discussions, but we're going to have one nonetheless. I am going to talk in a very opinionated manner about certain decisions that Respawn made as we moved forward into the second game, and I ask you guys to do the same. This is all for the sake of fun. We're not here to thrash Respawn to say Titanfall 2 is a terrible game and it would have been 10 times better had they done this. We're just here to say, hey, you know what? I kind of liked that in Titanfall 1. I wish they would have kept that. Or, hey, I'm really glad they didn't keep that in Titanfall 1, because that was a bit rubbish, and I think they did it much better in Titanfall 2. Just, again, drawing some comparisons for the sake of nostalgia, and also for celebrating the 3-year anniversary of the original Titanfall. That's pretty freaking cool. Respawn's been doing Titanfall-themed stuff for that long now, and I'm looking forward to, hopefully, a long and prosperous future with this franchise, well beyond Titanfall 2, even, maybe. So where do we start? Well, there's a long list of things. I actually put this list together while I was at work today. I was just walking around, I was stocking some things. I'm like, yeah, you know, make a little list for Titanfall 1, some ideas I want to jot down. I guess it's important that we talk about mobility. Obviously, the movement system was one of the most unique things in Titanfall 1 at the time, and, you know, the game really still does stand out in the way that it handles pilot mobility. Even Call of Duty, you know, adding wall running and sliding in throughout the years, that game stayed more heavy, more grounded. You can't really get the height, you know, or the scale of height, you know, that elevation that you can get in Titanfall 1 and even in Titanfall 2. That just makes it, you know, so spectacular when it comes to pilot mobility. That still obviously exists Titanfall 1. Titanfall 1 is undeniably a much slower game, and I've been saying this since the tech test. Even in the tech test for Titanfall 2, Titanfall 1 was still a slower game. I think a lot of people were functioning on some excessively jaded nostalgia and thinking that Titanfall 1 was incredibly fast. It really never was, unless you got into slide hopping, which was then, I believe, canceled out by Respawn. They removed it, and then bunny hopping was put in. Wall running, you know, was quick, and you could transition other walls to pick up speed, but the game was never Titanfall 2 quick. I mean, you want to hit the stim button in Titanfall 1 and see what happens? Not very much, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't really give you that boost, you know, that Titanfall 2 does. So it's definitely a slower experience. One might say that that makes it a little bit easier to play. I think Titanfall 1 had a lower skill ceiling for the majority of people who played it. When I played the game, I never got into slide hopping or bunny hopping as it turned into. You know, I didn't really play it on that spectrum. I didn't really ever concern myself with that. So looking back and now playing the game and not doing any of that, you know, it feels natural to me. It's like, yeah, this is how I played Titanfall 1, and you know what? I kind of enjoy this a little bit more. As much as I like slide hopping, and I think it's cool that we can manipulate the mobility, you know, inside of Titanfall 2, a small part of me is like, what does it really add to the game, though? It makes for a higher skill ceiling, but that's about it. The reality is, a very small portion of the Titanfall 2 community actually slide hops. I would say more people know how to air strafe. That's just the idea of kind of moving in the air. A lot of people do that. You know, people learn how to turn corners. But for the most part, it's maybe, what, 10-20% of people who actually slide hop on a regular basis? It's not for most people, and most people do really well without it in a public setting. You don't really need it. If you're going to play the game on a very competitive level, you know, with people like Frothy and, you know, that portion of the community, then it's a different story, but the average person just doesn't play there. So no, I don't think it adds anything to the game for most people. So if they were to say tomorrow that they were removing slide hopping from the game, I honestly wouldn't be upset. I know that's a bit of blasphemy. There's a portion of the community that just thinks it's the coolest thing ever. And it is cool. It is. It really is. But when I ask myself once again, how much does it add to the experience? For me personally, not very much. The game would still be just as fun without it. If anything, I think maybe more people would feel the game just kind of sits at a more even level for everyone. And maybe that would mean that more people would look into actually playing the game. Sometimes accessibility needs to be sacrificed for the sake of skill ceiling, and I think that's one decision where I'd be okay with it. I'd be just fine with the game getting a little bit more accessible at the cost of just a little bit of skill ceiling with the manipulation of the mobility system. I mean, after all, we can still wall run and do all the crazy fun jump stuff. We still have a slide mechanic. We still have an air strafe mechanic. I'd be fine and dandy with that. I think that's one of the interesting things about most of the maps in Titanfall 1 as well, is that they felt very utilitarian in their design, because Respawn wanted to make sure that players could make huge wall run transitions to cover massive lengths in areas of the maps. Now, not all the maps were this way, but most of the maps were set up to that degree. Titanfall 2, we see maps like Crash Site that are actually very difficult to traverse wall run to wall run if you can't air strafe or slide hop. So, interesting change in design decision there. Rob and I are actually going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow on our second episode of Pilots Ponder. So if you want to get a deeper discussion about map design in Titanfall 2, and also we're going to draw some comparisons to TF1, that's going to be the place to do it. Let's move forward though. Let's just talk overall game feel. I think Titanfall still feels like a really great game. Titanfall 2 definitely has more polish in its overall design. I think the guns feel just a bit better. I think recoil on certain weapons in Titanfall 1 was handled maybe a little bit better, but that's getting really deep. All in all, Titanfall 2 just feels like a more polished experience, both visually and also from an animations and gameplay perspective. Now, Titanfall 1 was no slouch in the animations department. Respawn was diving into the source engine, modifying it, giving it their own flavor, and I think they did a killer job. It's still a really beautiful game to watch played, to look at. The animations for the weapons, everything just feels so well strung together. It just feels like a really good game still. It by no means does it feel terrible to play since the release of Titanfall 2, but it definitely is, it's a different experience, let's leave it at that. While we're on the subject of visuals, this is the game running on PC at insane. This is it maxed out. It's a bit rough around the edges when compared to Titanfall 2, but I think aesthetics-wise, from a UI design perspective, from an overall theme, it feels a little bit more utilitarian, a bit more industrial, and a part of me kind of likes that. There's a bit less polish to the theme of the game, to the Titans, to the weapons, to the environments. And I kind of like that. It even carries over into something as small as like the scope design. We look at the blue dot here we get for the G2, and there's a lot of just unnecessary bits on the dot site itself, which kind of lends itself to that aesthetic that Titanfall 1 had, which I like and I don't like all at the same time. There's parts of it where I'm like, yeah, that's good, but then there's other times where I'm like, yeah, that's a bit too rough in some cases. So I think Titanfall 2 wins for me in overall design approach. I think they really nailed down the sci-fi vibe at that point, while still, giving us that atmosphere of, these otherworldly places and this, advanced Titan technology. I think they really, they really hit it out of the park with Titanfall 2 in that regard. This is probably the biggest thing to talk about in this game, though, is the Titans themselves. Obviously, this was the biggest change that was made across games. We no longer had these custom chassis selections. We can't just make custom Titan loadouts. We can't pick, the Ogre, the Strider, the Atlas, and then, load up our own core and our own set of abilities and our own weapons. It's all now locked down to these different Titans, and I think that's one of the things that most of the community will disagree with. I think most people that I talk to, and when we talk about Titanfall 2, they say, you know what, I still don't like the way they handled the Titans. I liked the freedom. I think customization is indeed becoming a bigger and bigger thing for certain shooters. There are some games that get, we're just going to narrow things down. This is going to be the end of that. We'll stick to visual customization. But there are games like Call of Duty over the years now that have adopted, the Pick 10 system, that are about excessive player customization, letting you build out any sort of loadout. And I think a lot of people wanted to see Titanfall go that route. And I think it would have been cool. Do we know if it would have been an easier game to balance? Not really. I do think Titanfall 2 struggles to get all of its Titans in an area where they feel usable or where they feel viable compared to other Titans. And maybe that was something in Titanfall 1 that was a little bit more easily handled by those custom Titan loadouts, the custom weapons, I do miss my Arc Cannon. I miss being able to pick up another Titan's weapon on the battlefield. I think to some degree, the combat from Titan to Titan felt a little bit more based on player skill and a little bit less based on the abilities that the Titan they've chosen actually has equipped. I may just be saying that because of the existence of like Tone compared to my poor North Star and my poor Scorch, you know, but you know, they do seem to be struggling in Titanfall 2. Things like Ion's shoulder laser mount, you know, I'm going to keep talking about this because it really makes North Star far less viable than she should be. Why would I pick North Star when I have a shoulder mounted sniper rifle with my Ion, you know? So it's one of those decisions that I disagree. You know, I very happily and positively disagree with you on that one, Respawn. I think the original Titan selection system, being able to make your own custom Titans, was a great idea. And I think all in all, Titanfall 1 was better in that department. As much as I like the individual designs of the Titans that we now have, I like being able to make my Titan. You know, sort of like I came out of the factory at Hammond Robotics and I said, yeah, I'm going to get that, and I'm going to, oh man, this is going to be perfect for this type of combat. And then eventually Respawn got all crazy and they added OS voices. So, you know, I've got Jeeves in my Titan talking in my ear while I'm rocking and rolling with my arc cannon. That's really cool. You know, that's a layer of personality and customization, that connection between my Titan and me that is lost in Titanfall 2. And I do dearly miss that. Also, first-person Titan animations, guys. It's such a small thing, right? But I see so many people talk about it, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't agree more. Just being in first person, getting pulled into my Titan was such an incredible thing. When Respawn did that in Titanfall 1, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool! So to see that removed in Titanfall 2, I was quietly devastated. I didn't really speak on it as much as other people did when I first talked about the game. You know, I tried to just focus on the positive things. But I really do miss that, guys. That and the OS voices, man. That was just some cool stuff, you know? Respawn, they gave us a way to really get connected with our Titans, and then they kind of took it away. So I understand to this day why people are really upset about the way they handled Titans in Titanfall 2. You know, outside of that, I guess we could talk a little bit about the things that were added post-launch with Titanfall 1. You know, it eventually got the rank chip, which I think was a really brilliant idea. I don't know why it's not in Titanfall 2. I think it was so smart. You know, I talk about ranked all the time, and that's all I'm really talking about, was just the rank chip was ingenious. It was a really, really great idea. I really liked it. Also, we eventually saw the weekly and daily challenges. Those were a great way to give players a little bit more purpose each and every time they hopped into the game. You know, maybe those will eventually make their way back to Titanfall 2. We also have to recognize here that not everything from the first game could have made its way over. There are deadlines. You can't just keep adding things to a game, otherwise you'll never be able to ship it. But I will say that I wish they would have carried over. They would have made sacrifices somewhere and brought over those challenges. I think those were fantastic. They were just a great extra layer of replayability. They gave me something to focus on when I was getting into the game's 4th and 5th and 6th month. And I think a lot of people would really like to have those back, alongside, of course, the custom OS voices. It's going to be interesting to see where Titanfall 2 goes. You know, we know very little about the future of the game outside of more maps and potentially more game modes and Prime Titans. I don't know that Respawn is ever going to expand on the Titans or the ways that we can customize them. It's just going to be interesting to see what they do. So much happened with Titanfall 1 that I never expected, so I'm kind of looking forward to or expecting to be surprised by Respawn once again. Maybe they won't this time. Maybe they'll do exactly what I think they're going to do and just keep rocking and rolling with what they've got. Keep worrying about game balance, which is obviously important, and just keep seeing where things go. But it's going to be a fun ride nonetheless. And I think, you know what, I'm going to hop back into Titanfall 1 a little bit more here and there. I'll probably do some of it on stream because, you know what, it's just a good game. I don't think there's anything wrong, you know, it's not nostalgia to look back and say, you know what, Titanfall 1 is still a really solid game. It may be a bit slower. I don't think it has the same level of polish and detail and design that Titanfall 2 has. I don't miss the old rodeo mechanic. I think it was a little bit too much, the original rodeo mechanic. I actually like the battery system this time around. There are plenty of things about Titanfall 2 that I really loved that I spoke about in my review of the game way back when it launched, and those things remain true. But there's no doubt that there are certain elements of Titanfall 1 that I miss maybe just a little bit. You know, just a tiny little bit, Respawn. I just miss them a little bit. And I'm sure, you know what, some of the guys at Respawn probably do too. Feel free to share your thoughts, guys. Again, just take all of this with a massive grain of salt. It's a grain of salt so big you couldn't even fit it in your salt shaker. We're just having fun looking back at an old game, you know, sort of reflecting, revisiting, and just having a good time doing it. Feel free to share some of your thoughts down in the comment section below. Things that you loved in the original game that you wish were in the first game. You know, things that you really like about Titanfall 2 that you're glad they didn't do again, or you're glad that they left behind. feel free to throw them down there as well. I'm gonna get back to working on that new closer, and I will see you in the next one.